Hi, this is May.
And I'm Joy.
Welcome to the QWERTY Writing Life Podcast, where we have candid chats about our creative lives.
May and I are friends, writers, and creatives who want to share our endeavors out loud.
On this podcast, we're here to encourage each other, and you too,
and share tools we've discovered or made up.
So you can follow your passions with a little support. So grab your tea
or your coffee,
and let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the QWERTY Writing Life Podcast. We are so excited to present to you the second part from the special series that we did at a university. We got to guest lecture for a creative writing class there, and it was so much fun. We wanted to share it with you guys. So this is the second part. So if you missed the first part, you don't have to listen to them in order. You can go back and listen to that one another time. But in this one, we're sharing some of our writing craft tips with the students and with you.
Yes, and thank you so much to Carey University's Language and Literature Department for letting us speak there. It was such a joy and such a pleasure to be there, and we hope you got some good information from us.
Definitely.
So enjoy the show, everyone.
Bye. Have a great week.
All right. So the next question that we were asked to talk about was, what could we tell you guys about the writing craft that could help you speed things up, write more proficiently, that sort of thing. So,
in other words, the things that we learned the hard way.
Yes, we learned the hard way, so you don't have to. So here is our segment of advice for the natives. You want to go first?
Okay, so, sorry, never go with your first idea, okay? So, you would probably be better to talk about this because you were the one who kind of came up with it.
Okay, so I can't remember exactly who I learned this from. Oh, actually I can. There is an author named Rachel Stephen who has a YouTube channel. She is Scottish and adorable, and she cusses a lot, so just beware. But she talked about this thing where if you have a story idea, you have a blank sheet of paper and you write down number 1 through 5, okay? And then you're like, okay, what is your story idea? You've got number 1 right here. And you write down, Jane comes home from school and finds something shocking, okay? So that's your first idea. I'm like, okay, yeah, I can talk about how Jane comes home from school and she comes home and something's shocking. Yeah, I can do that. That's a good idea. But then you move on and you say, no, let's make that idea better. So you go number 2. Jane comes home from school and goes to the kitchen to get a snack and opens the refrigerator and finds a head. So you go a little bit deeper. Then you're like, okay, how can I make that even more detailed and go a little bit deeper? So number 3 is, Jane comes home from school, goes to the kitchen to get a snack, opens the refrigerator, finds a head, pulls it out, takes off the skull like they do in that Indiana Jones movie, and starts eating brains. Okay, this is really gross, and I'm sorry. It's just what's happening in my head right now. So, okay. So that's number 3. So do you get the point? How you go deeper and deeper into the story, and you start figuring out like what are the details that makes Jane different, that makes your story different, that really is going to solidify an idea for you to create an outline
I didn't know
for.
Jeffrey Dahmer had a sister.
Chills. So the point is that your creative mind, your right brain, it needs to warm up. Like you just can't, if you do the first thing and it's a good one, just imagine how cool your 5th idea is going to be, right? So it has to warm up, and whenever you start saying, okay, what else you got? That's when it really starts to surprise you and give you some really good stuff. Okay.
And then I was saying that when I was writing articles for the newspaper, I would do the same thing. I never really thought about it, but I would sit down and I'd be like, okay, how am I going to tell this story in a different way? Like, what's the angle to this? What is going to be the most interesting to someone? And it's not going to be the first thing that you think of. Like, I could be driving home from the interview or whatever, the event or whatever it was that I was covering, and I would think, oh, I'm going to write it this way, and blah, blah, blah. And then by the time I get to the back to the news office, I would have a totally and completely different idea, and it would be much better. So yeah.
And we can tailor this to creative nonfiction in that maybe you have an assignment for this class and you have to share a story about a memory. The first memory that you come up with is probably the safe one. So ask yourself, what would be the next one? And so put that one down. What's the next one that you would write about? And the next one, and most likely your fifth one is going to start stirring some emotions inside of you that are heavy, deep, strong emotions. And that's probably the story you need to write, either for you, for your healing, or for someone else who reads it. Healing or elation or nostalgia or that sort of thing. So that's how you can use it for creative nonfiction. In the same vein, Holly Lyle is a creative writing teacher, and she had one of her exercises in one of the classes that I took of hers, where in fiction you generally need to know your ending if you're going to write the most effectively, I guess you would say. So what she suggested in this class that I was in is like you have your story idea and that sort of thing, and then one of the exercises was think of the worst thing that could happen to your main character. So you write down the worst thing that you think could happen to your character, and then she says do it again. What's the worst thing that could happen to your character that's not that you just wrote? And then you write that. And then you do it another time. By the third time, you've probably got something that is just really heart-wrenching and compelling. Your first one most likely is safe. Your second one's a little bit more risky, but it's still safe. And that third one, because your right brain doesn't have anywhere else to go but into the depths of despair, that's most likely the one that's going to be the most compelling whenever you're writing and creating a story. So never go with your first idea.
In summary.
In summary.
And then also, the next thing is we would say plan. Planning is very important. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard this or not, but in the writing world, there are planners and there are pantsers and there are somewhere in between plotsers, lancers. I don't know. There are a couple of different ways you can mesh those together, okay? And so the pantsers are the people who just sit down and write, and they say they have no plan, which I don't agree with, but that's just my 2 cents.
You have to have some idea.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. We're a little bit more on the plotting side of things. So plotters obviously are going to have more detailed outlines, more detailed ideas of where they're going with the story. Okay, they know more than just, okay, this is my main character and we're gonna go somewhere and somebody's gonna die. Like there's a little bit more detail than that. And then there are people in between. And I think at least for me, I can be slightly different ways with slightly different projects too. And so that's part of like learning yourself and your process in your writing.
But if you're not expecting to spend years on a project, then planning is probably the best way to go. And here's the thing though, you can't be such a strict planner though that you don't allow creativity to hit and strike and create something beautiful out of what you've planned. So it might be that you have this plan and it allows you to just start your writing, and it gives you some sort of safety net to know that you have a place to go whenever you're writing. But if you're struck with inspiration, don't be afraid to let that change your plan.
Very good point. And another thing is the way for you to learn what your style is, like how is this going to work for you? The very best thing is to read about other authors and find out what they do, okay? Not that you're going to do exactly what they do. And I see this a lot of times in those courses or blog posts or whatever it is that you find that tell you the best way to, outline a book or all this kind of stuff. I hate to break it to you, that's not the only way, okay? It might be the best way for that person. It may not work at all for you. Okay, so when you're looking at these things, you're reading all these things, you're seeing what other writers do, take all of that in, kind of see and get all these different ideas, then pull from there, okay, I think this would work for me. I think this would also work for me. And pull it together, try it out, and see what works and what doesn't. And like I said, this could change project to project for you. But as you go along and you use this process a few times, you're going to start to learn things about yourself and what works for you. And so, yeah, it's very trial and error for every person. I mean, we can tell you what we do, we can tell you what has worked for us, but that's not necessarily going to be what works for you. So you have to figure that out.
A great place to start looking for processes, author processes, is a podcast by Rachel Herron. She's an author and a podcaster, and her entire podcast is called How Do You Write, and it's interviewing authors on their writing process, and that's all she does. So if you could just start at episode 1 if you wanted to, and just listen to all of these different processes. But just as individual and unique as the projects, the final product of art is each person's individual creative process. So don't be afraid to try something that even you think might not work. It could surprise you and work. But understand that whatever you do, it's going to need to be tailored to your individuality.
Did you want to talk about it?
Sure. Yeah, I do. So fast drafting. This is something that I am a huge fan of. So Wild Hope, the first novel that I wrote that no one will ever see, took years to write. Years, can I tell you? And I was learning and all of this stuff in the middle of it. I was also working full time, and then I also got pregnant and things happened. But anyway, so it took years for me to write, and I can tell you that in the middle of all of that time, that my perspective changed, my views on humanity and life changed, my personal beliefs changed, all of these things changed inside of me, which made what I was producing change. So it went from something that was kind of light and airy to something dark and dreadful. So but here's the thing, when you get to the end of the draft and it's taken you all of this time, you don't even remember what you started out with at the beginning. So you have this draft that is choppy in presentation, it is incohesive in your character arts, your plot might be there, it might not. So, so if it takes you a seriously long time to draft a project, your revision process is going to be terrible. So may I encourage you to plan, as Joy said, and to dedicate time, and not just dedicate all free time to one project. So Joy time blocks for her stuff. I project block. So anytime that I have free time, either in the early morning or lunch hour or at night, I work on generally one project developmental stage at a time. So things have gotten a little bit different because of these other projects that have come up. But right now my entire focus is on the nonfiction book. So this is what I'm working on, and a little bit of art and poetry splattered in here and there. When this is over with and the art and poetry is over with, my full attention will go to revisions to my women's fiction novel. And that's what I will work with in every moment that I have. So until that's done for that content revision. Then I'll set that aside and work on something else. So I guess time blocking and project blocking is how I kind of get things done.
And also goals and deadlines are very important. And if you're going to do anything more on a freelance thing, or if this is something that you might pursue while you have a full-time job, you have other responsibilities, you have to set these deadlines and goals for yourself, or you're never going to finish anything. And that is something that is just super, super important. So figure out how long it takes you to write, okay, kind of learning yourself, learning, your speed at things, and then go ahead and block off the time that you need. Think it through, add in some time for emergencies or for things that are going to come up that you're not expecting, and then stick to it. Make a plan, okay? So say if you're going to do NaNoWriMo, so 50,000 words in 1 month, Okay, they have things that you can go in, you can plug in, okay, how many days you plan to write, and it will tell you how many words you need to write each of those days. So you may not be able to write 7 days a week for 30 days, okay? So figure out how many you can. Go ahead and mark off the days that you have family things. I mean, Thanksgiving, you know, as much as we would rather be sitting holed up in a room somewhere by ourselves writing, we're probably gonna be with family, okay, or someone, all right? So, you know, mark off that day. You're not gonna write that day, all right? So be practical with it, but set those goals and those deadlines.
Absolutely. And if you can finish your first draft, well, mark off time for your planning, and at the end of that planning time, figure out how long you're gonna need in order to write a first draft. If you can do that in 6 months, wow, that would be great. If you have all of these other responsibilities and you're fitting that in, if you're looking at a novel-sized project and you can do that in 6 months, even if it's a skeletal draft, it's still going to be more cohesive than if you did it over years. And your life is changing and you're changing and your book is changing and you don't know what happened to it. So experience this girl right here. Okay, so and then at that point, when you have a first draft that's written in a reasonable amount of time, you first revise and then you edit. And I think Joy wants to talk about this.
I do love this. I'm a little bit of a nerd. All right, so I think we both agree that we both love revision because it is the hardest, but it's also the most important, and it's also the most satisfying part of writing, because you are literally going in, all right, you know how when you're cleaning out a room or a closet that you haven't touched in a long time and a whole lot of junk's in there, right? Okay, you have to pull everything out first, right? It gets really, really messy, way more messy than it was to begin with. And then finally you go through everything and then you put it back and now it's all pretty, okay? That's revision. Okay, you're literally going to be pulling parts out, you're going to be moving them around, you're going to be throwing away huge chunks, you're going to be adding things, it's going to get messy, but you're also going to be able to see the process and you're going to be able to see it become something so much more and so much just better than you ever dreamed, okay? So that's the thing with revision. And there are a lot of rounds to revision. So what I handed you guys, that handout, that is chapter 1 of my novel in 3 different versions. Yes, iterations. There you go. So the very first one, somewhere in the middle, and then what you actually have in the book today. And
when you're saying revision, can you explain what the difference is between revisions and edits?
Oh, yes, that's a good thought. Okay, so, well, all right, let me say this too. I have written just a brief kind of PDF that I send out to people who have signed up for my newsletter for editing, where I talk about, are you ready for the red pen? Okay, a lot of people think that as soon as they type the end the first time, it's time to send it off to an editor and someone else is going to fix everything. That's not how it works. The very first thing that you have to do is self-revise. Okay, so you have to go through it. What I recommend is just read through it first without a pen in your hand, or at least don't let yourself write on the manuscript. If you want to jot some notes as you're reading, that's one thing, but just take it in as a reader, okay? That makes a very big difference because you're able to just kind of process and bring it in as a reader instead of the person putting it out, okay? And so revisions are much more big picture, okay? So at some point, you are likely going to be revising and have a developmental edit, which is kind of those big picture things like, do you have plot holes? Do you have, is there a character that just suddenly disappears and you don't know where they went? Because that happens sometimes. They get lost. Those bigger things. And then as you continue to revise, you're going to get a little bit more specific in the things that you're looking at as you go, until you get to the point where the story itself is solid. The story is as it needs to be,
and the structure's in place.
and the structure's in place, the pacing, yes, all of those things. Everything is clearly defined. You have your theme. You have all of those things are worked out. It's all flowing. Then you have at least 2 more rounds of editing, and everybody calls them by different names, okay? So I'm not going to use a name, but I'm going to say the next thing would be to look at your paragraphs as a whole, your sentences as a whole, to make sure that your grammar, your syntax, the flow is good. You're not starting every paragraph with the same word. Your transitions are good between your scenes, between your chapters, making sure that your chapter openings and your chapter closings are really solid. All of those things. And then the next round of edits gets down to every comma and blessed semicolon, okay? It gets very detailed. And then there will probably be another round of final proofing. You might also have especially if you're going with a publishing company, they'll have someone who specifically, their editing role is to look at your manuscript for legal potential problems. Okay, so like you might have very specific editors like that. So, yeah, so did I answer that?
Yeah, I think maybe to sum up with that is revision is where you're looking at your story as a whole for the content. Like it's saying what you want it to say, the characters are doing what you want it to do, the structure is the way that you want it. It's the content that you have. Then your editing is going to be more of the way that content is presented. So you've got sentence structure and grammar. You've got your syntax, and you have your punctuation, things like that. Okay? So your first draft is like bushwhacking your way through an overgrown forest, right? And so there's a path. You can see the hole in the greenery, but you're really kind of scared to walk through it as a reader, okay? So what your revision does is it paves that path with bricks and kind of gives you a place to stand as a reader, so you can walk through this path, right? And then whenever you're walking on something that's solid and paved and that sort of thing, you can really get to see all of the scenery and the flowers and the nice tree over there and that sort of thing, maybe a frog or something. So, and those things, that scenery is going to be your lyrical prose and your word choice and your quippy dialogue and things like that. You get to see those things in revision, right? So your editing, whenever you're looking at punctuation and grammar and that sort of thing, that's going to be the weather in the forest. Your grammar and your punctuation, your sentence structure, your syntax is the weather. So if you're a reader and you're walking down this path and you're enjoying the story and the sunshine and maybe overcast, there's a light breeze going on, you really get to live inside that story and enjoy every aspect of it, right? But if your editing is bad and you have grammar and you have punctuation errors and you have syntax problems and you have run-on sentences, things like that, that distracts your reader walking along this path from seeing the scenery around there and to really enjoying the story. It pulls them out. So when there's rain, sleet, snow, hail going on top of them, they can't get past that to see the story, to see the path, to see the scenery. Revision versus editing.
This is something that'll look a little different for everyone, I think, and depending on who's on your team, which way you're going, all of that kind of stuff. So over there, that's the stack, and I think I might be missing a couple of versions, but that's my novel over there, beginning with the red binder on the bottom. And this right here is one lowly little short story that appeared in here. So I decided kind of last minute to enter this competition. I won second place, but all of this happened in a very short period of time. This is 8 different drafts, and I may even have missed one in here. But I had some amazing critique partners who were able to kind of give me some feedback as I went through this. And yes, every single time there's red marks. I also, you don't have to look through all that if you don't want to. It's probably quite frightening. the one on top, that's the very beginning. That's the very first draft. So when I revise and when I edit, I have very specific things that I look for each time, especially when I get down to the edits, like the edits themselves, okay? So when I go through, I know I am going to be looking, this time I'm specifically looking for my syntax, for my word choices. I'm going to make sure that every word and every sentence has a place and a purpose and a reason for being there. If it doesn't have a reason, then it's getting chopped. And then I work my way down from there. So
your list that you cultivate is gonna be based off of your strengths and your weaknesses, okay? So if you know that you use adverbs a lot, or be verbs or things like that, then you're gonna have an editing pass that is going to be adverbs and be verbs, in which we do have for the CT book. So yeah, right. So we do have, so we know that we have wordy sentences. Joy and I, when we write together, we have very long sentences. We know that we use a lot of adverbs. We know that we use some be verbs. We know that, what were some of our other things that we had?
some cliches.
So, yeah, cliches. Yeah. We have to check for cliches every time to make sure we're saying things in an original way. These are all passes that we have whenever we get our editing process. But the first thing that we do is make sure that our content is solid, and that's where we are right now. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So revise first, make sure your content is solid, and then you edit for grammar and such. Because if you start editing before you get your content and your structure down, most likely you're going to be cutting some of those pieces that you just painstakingly edited. So we don't want to waste your time, and we know that you don't want to waste your time either. So, yes.
Yeah, so the next thing is to find your team, okay? And so this is something that we're part of each other's team because we're critique partners. We read each other's stuff, we give each other feedback, and that's a very special relationship and dynamic. Your team will consist of your writing community, okay? So that could be, you might be part of an online writing group, you might be part of an in-person writing group. You have, I know you mentioned, your friends and you guys wrote poetry and you had all of that going on, so that's your team, that's part of your team, your writing community. Then you also will have, if you have critique partners, beta readers are another thing, and they are not the same thing as critique partners. Beta readers are the ones who will read it when your story is almost done, like you're probably in those final rounds of edits, getting those final little tiny details done, and they're giving you just a reader reaction. Whereas a critique partner is going to be another writer who can go through it and say, look, you gotta work on this, you've got these plot holes, you've got, Jack's mama really needs to be in this story, Joy. And then you'll also have editors, so whatever route you take, you're going to have editors. Like we talked about, we've got designers, mm-hmm. illustrators, agents, all sorts of people on your team. Mm-hmm. So find who your team is, and this also includes, and I didn't write this on here, but like we've talked about, our family and our friends, mm-hmm. the people in our lives who may not, mm-hmm. they may not necessarily be involved with you in the process, but they are there to support and encourage you.
Yes. There's a stereotype that writers have to be solitary and alone, and that's not true. I don't think that's true anymore. It might have been true at one point in time. Yes, it's your idea, and yes, you write long hours all by yourself, but there is a team, and there are people out there who are meant to be in your team. So you just gotta find them. And the internet makes that a lot easier these days.
All right, so this brings us back to what we mentioned earlier about this is something where you will constantly be learning because the publishing industry is ever changing, okay? So it's constantly evolving. The publishing industry now, this year, is not the same as it was even last year or the year before, and heavens, 10 years ago. I mean, it's completely different. It really is. Another thing is that, like we've already said, you're going to be learning and growing at the same time. And as your writing grows, your writing matures, you're also going to be doing the same thing. Like May said earlier, when you write, you are going to learn things about yourself. Okay, you're going to uncover things about yourself. Some of them are going to be hard. All of them most likely will be good, if you let them be good. And so as you change and your writing changes, you're constantly going to be learning. You're going to be looking for new ways to improve what you've learned about yourself, how you're changing in your writing, and all of those things.
And how you can create something that's better than the last thing that you created.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I wanted to be sure to say. A lot of authors, even some of the most famous authors today, love to look for new things to write, to challenge themselves. It may be just writing from a different point of view. Like when we listened to Ann Patchett at the Mississippi Book Festival.
I was just thinking about that.
So great to hear her talk. But she talked about how each book that she's written, she wanted to do something different. And so maybe it was with the type of character or the point of view or
her first book that she wrote, she wanted to write it in omniscient third person, right?
I think you're right.
Yeah, omniscient third person. She found out she couldn't do that yet. So she wrote it in first person, I think. Then the next book she wrote in third person close, if I remember right. And then I think it was her fourth book, she finally wrote a book in omniscient third person because she was there, like in her craft. So she had a goal and she continued producing and to learn the things that she needed to learn in order to reach that goal. I just thought, wow.
Every, just starting out author versus one who's internationally known, they still are learning new things, and they're excited to learn new things and are looking for those new things to learn.
Yes,
Love it.
And on that vein, we have some suggestions for you to learn new things. And that's all written down in your handout, so we'll just talk really briefly about that. So your podcast, you have the QWERTY Writing Life, where you can learn new things from us on a weekly basis. That happened. And so there is an author named Joanna Penn who has made a living out of being an author. So she is a fabulous example of someone who can do that. And she has a podcast called The Creative Pen, and she speaks about industry things that interest her. She doesn't claim to be an industry news podcast, but she has very interesting guests on to talk about different craft elements as well.
Great insights into the industry as well.
Yes.
She's actually called a few things that she's seen happening in a few years, and some of them have happened. So she's very in tune with the industry and has a great eye for what is coming and what's going to be the next big thing.
And if you do decide to make this a part of your career, we think that you should listen to the Ally podcast as well. And this is an industry news kind of thing, what's going to happen, what is happening. This is Orna Ross, who is a Scottish author, and she started this organization that Joy is actually a member of. So maybe she can speak a little more about it.
Yeah, so Ally it stands for the Alliance of Independent Authors, and it is based in the UK, but there are members all over the world. I'm a member of that. I'm also a member of IBPA, which stands for, I hope I get this right, Independent Book Publishers Association. There's a magazine over there that they actually put that out. I think it's either monthly or quarterly. And both of those organizations do the same thing, but IBPA is based in the US, and they really are just there to be a resource for authors, to be a support for authors, and they're kind of the professional organizations for independent authors. So they're outstanding, and they both have podcasts.
Alone in a Room with Invisible People is an author and her daughter. They co-host this craft-centered podcast, and it's fun. There's also, disclaimer, there's also cussing in that one, but information, spot on. Right Minded is another one. Have you listened to Right Minded yet? Oh my goodness, this one's such a good one. Right Minded is one of the people from NaNoWriMo and one of the people from SheWrites.com. co-host this, and there's generally an interview that goes along with it, and I find it everything that I've listened to on this podcast has been really interesting, and sometimes it's craft centered, sometimes it's industry centered. How do you write? I mentioned that one already, but that's the writing process. So if you're interested about the writing process, that's a good one. Oh, that's me too. Okay.
Yeah.
The career author, they are two co-authors who co-host this podcast, and they have written multiple books together, but they have also just, they are co-proprietors of Molten Universe, which is now a publishing company. So they are bringing in other authors and publishing them under their own company now, as well as writing their own books and co-hosting this podcast and.
Okay, so then there's also Mom Writes and Writer Mom Life, and both of these are authors we know, fellow writer moms. Okay, so they are coming at this from the perspective of people who have jobs and kids that they're responsible for, but they're also pursuing their creative passions. And so those are really cool.
And I do encourage you, even if you don't have children, there's so much to learn from these, especially in the Mom Writes. Is in a collaboration with Author Accelerator, and that is a book coaching company. So what the premise is for the first season, we have two new authors who are writing their first draft. And
Hey, Abby and Mel.
Hi, Abby and Mel.
I love you.
And so they're writing their first draft, and they're being book coached on air on a podcast. So how much guts does it take to do that, right? So if you wanted to know what book coaching was like, and if you wanted to see what kind of advice that people are getting on their first drafts, then season 1 of Mom Writes is great. Then season 2, they're editing their first drafts with the book coach. So big stuff happening there.
Let's see, Magic Lessons?
Oh, Magic Lessons is a podcast that is, I think it's one season and done kind of thing. So this is Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Big Magic and who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. And she is expanding what she wrote about in Big Magic about creativity and following your creative endeavors through this podcast. And so what she'll do is she'll get letters in, she'll pick one of the letters, she'll call that person and say, tell me about what's going on with you and why you're stumped. So they'll talk about it. Then she'll bring in a big creative. So one of the ones that she called was Neil Gaiman, to talk about this particular person's situation. So Neil Gaiman, or someone to his equivalent, gives advice on this other person's situation. And then Elizabeth Gilbert calls that person back and says, Neil Gaiman said. And then she follows up with them after a certain amount of time to see how their life is going. So just really, really inspiring stories to help motivate you with Magic Lessons.
I have a couple of other suggestions, and this goes into the always learning, right? Okay, which all of these are, but Merriam-Webster's word of the day, okay? I'm telling you guys, we could all use a better vocabulary, and this is literally like 5 minutes out of your day. This is something that I actually intend on using in school with my kids, and kind of just having us listen to that every morning. What's the word of the day? And now let's see how many times can we use this word, and all of that kind of stuff, and just make it something fun. So I think that anyone would benefit from doing that. And then also, I love and adore Mignon Fogarty, Quick and Dirty Tips with Grammar Girl. Okay, and these are also like 15-minute, like super short, and she gives you words and the history behind words or sayings or cliches or all of these different things, and I find it fascinating. She also does the whole, nerdy grammar stuff, which I totally geek out on. Then there is Sci-Fi and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, which is not just for sci-fi and fantasy. It gives a lot of information about the industry in general, about how to market your work, about how to get more readers, newsletter subscribers, tips and tricks. Just a lot of things like that.
Yeah.
And then also I put on here TED Talks. So any TED Talks are going to be inspirational. They're going to be something new, and not all of these are going to be writing, of course. You're going to get all sorts of things there. So I think that's super cool.
Yeah, just keeping your mind open to learning more and to being a better person. I think the TED Talks are really good for that. And Somewhat Creative is Kyle Miller's podcast. And do you remember Kyle Miller? He's from William Carey, and he's living in Florida now, and he's doing this amazing podcast about music and other creative endeavors, and he is always funny and always clever. Kyle is amazing. Also, he's branching out into other creative endeavors. That's one reason why he interviewed me as a writer. He's looking at other things too, so you might get something that's a little bit different from music or writing, just all different kinds of stuff. The other thing that we were going to talk about were books. So if you'd like to look, these are some craft books that I endorse. So you can look at those later. But yeah, absolutely. Any questions or concerns or? Fabulous. Wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thanks for listening until the end.
Seriously, you're a trooper.
Do you think QWERTY Writing Life is the bomb?
May, you just said the bomb.
Don't you censor me.
If you think QWERTY Writing Life rocks ice for real,
Oh my word.
please rate, review, and share us with others.
If you have questions about this week's episode or want to start a conversation, you can reach us by visiting QWERTYWritingLife.podbean.com.
We'll be back next week with more candid chats for you.